Winter solstice. Midnight. The Silver Moon Pack territory. The snow falls in silence. She stands at the border, barefoot, her belongings burned behind her. The pack elders have spoken. Omega. Wolfless. Unworthy. 23 years in this territory, and tonight they erase her existence with a single decree. Her name is Elara Ashwood, and in this moment she is nothing. But what they don't know, what they cannot possibly comprehend, is that the woman they're casting into the frozen wilderness holds a secret so profound, so dangerous, that her absence will nearly destroy everything they've built. This isn't a story about rejection. It's a story about the invisible threads that bind fate itself, and how sometimes the weakest link is actually holding the entire chain together. Imagine being cast out, forgotten, yet secretly pulling the strings of destiny. What if the most powerful person in the room was someone nobody even noticed? This is the unbelievable story of an outcast whose hidden actions and unseen influence weren't just a secret, but the very foundation of a future queen's reign. But before we understand how Elara Ashwood became the most powerful Luna in werewolf history, we need to understand what it means to be Omega in a world built on hierarchy, dominance, and the primal law of the wolf. Part 1. The nature of Omega. In werewolf society, your rank is determined before your first breath. Alpha bloodlines produce alphas. Beta families raise betas. And omegas? Omegas are born to serve. They are the bottom of every hierarchy, the last to eat, the first to be blamed, the invisible hands that maintain pack life while receiving none of its glory. But even among omegas, there are gradations of misery. And Elara Ashwood occupied the lowest rung of all. She was wolfless. In a society where your wolf, your inner beast, your primal power, defines your very existence, Elara had reached her 23rd year without ever experiencing a single shift. No transformation. No connection to the ancestral magic that flowed through every other pack member's veins. The healers had examined her countless times. The shamans had performed rituals. The pack elders had debated her existence in hushed, uncomfortable tones. But the conclusion was always the same. Elara Ashwood was broken. A genetic aberration. A reminder that even the mighty Silver Moon Pack could produce defective offspring. Her parents had died when she was 7, killed during a territorial dispute with a neighboring pack. With no family to protect her, no bloodline to claim her, Elara became property of the pack itself. She was raised in the communal Omega quarters, a series of deteriorating cabins at the edge of pack territory where the hierarchy was reinforced through every meal, every duty, every interaction. But here's what nobody noticed. While the other Omegas complained, schemed, and fought over scraps of status, Elara observed. She watched. She learned. And she began to see patterns that others missed. The girl who saw everything. Elara's childhood was defined by invisibility. She served meals in the pack house, where alphas discussed strategy and betas reported on patrol routes. She cleaned the training grounds, where young wolves learned combat techniques and political maneuvering. She tended the gardens that fed the pack, working alongside elderly Omegas who shared generations of gossip, secrets, and accumulated wisdom. And through it all, she listened. Not with the casual attention of someone overhearing conversations, but with the focused intensity of someone studying a language. She began to recognize patterns in pack dynamics that even the participants didn't fully understand. She noticed that Alpha Marcus, the pack leader, always made his most important decisions on Wednesday mornings, after his runs with his inner circle. She observed that Beta Commander Thorn's loyalty wavered whenever his mate was mentioned, revealing a vulnerability in the command structure. She recognized that the pack's finances were managed by Elder Rosewood, whose gambling addiction had created a silent crisis that nobody acknowledged. By the time Elara was 15, she had constructed a mental map of the Silver Moon Pack that was more accurate than any official hierarchy chart. She knew who held real power versus ceremonial positions. She understood which alliances were genuine and which were performance. She could predict pack decisions days before they were announced, simply by observing the subtle shifts in body language, seating arrangements, and conversation patterns. But she never revealed this knowledge, because she had learned the first rule of survival for those without power. Never let them know you're paying attention. It happened on Elara's 16th birthday, the day she was supposed to experience her first shift. Every werewolf's 16th birthday is marked by the awakening ceremony, a sacred ritual where young wolves embrace their beast for the first time under the full moon's guidance. It's a moment of transcendence, of claiming your place in the pack hierarchy, of finally understanding what it means to be truly alive. Elara prepared for months. She fasted as instructed. She meditated. She studied the ancient texts. She did everything the shamans prescribed. The entire pack gathered in the ceremonial circle, the full moon hanging low and luminous above the clearing. Elara stood at the center, surrounded by her age cohort, 15 other young wolves, all trembling with anticipation. The shamans began their chant. The moon's power surged through the clearing, visible as silver light that seemed to pulse with living energy. One by one, the other young wolves transformed. Bones cracked and reformed. Skin sprouted fur. Human cries transformed into howls of exhilaration. Within minutes, 15 magnificent wolves stood in the circle, their eyes glowing with newfound power, their bodies vibrating with primal energy. And Elara remained human. She felt the moon's pull. She sensed something stirring deep within her consciousness. But no transformation came. No wolf emerged. Just a hollow ache where her beast should have been. The silence in the clearing was absolute. Alpha Marcus stepped forward, his expression a mixture of confusion and disgust. "Where is your wolf?" Elara opened her mouth, but no words came. The shamans converged, checking her energy signatures, searching for any sign of her inner beast. After long minutes of examination, head shaman Corvus delivered his verdict. She is void. There is no wolf within her. She is incomplete. The pack's reaction was immediate and visceral. Disgust, pity, anger, fear. Because if Elara could exist without a wolf, what did that say about the fundamental nature of their kind? Was she even truly werewolf? Or was she something else entirely? Something that didn't fit into their carefully constructed worldview? From that moment, Elara's status changed from Omega to something worse. She became a ghost. People stopped looking at her directly. Conversations ceased when she entered rooms. Even other Omegas began to distance themselves, as if her condition might be contagious. But this isolation, this enforced invisibility, gave Elara something unexpected. Complete freedom to observe without interference. Rejection can destroy a person, or it can forge them into something unprecedented. For Elara, the years between 16 and 23 became a masterclass in understanding power, politics, and the hidden mechanics of social systems. Without the distraction of social acceptance, without the burden of maintaining relationships or status, she channeled all her energy into learning. She read every book in the pack library. Histories of werewolf civilization, tactical manuals, political treatises, studies of pack psychology. She taught herself multiple languages by listening to visiting dignitaries and studying ancient texts. She learned basic medicine by assisting the pack healers, absorbing knowledge that most wolves ignored because healing was considered beta work. But her real education came from observation. Elara developed a system. She began documenting pack dynamics in a series of hidden journals, using a cipher she'd invented to protect her notes. She created detailed profiles of every significant pack member, tracking their ambitions, fears, alliances, and vulnerabilities. She mapped the unofficial power structures that operated beneath the formal hierarchy. She identified the pack's strategic weaknesses, border vulnerabilities, supply chain dependencies, alliance instabilities. She recognized patterns in inter-pack politics that predicted conflicts months before they erupted. And she began to understand something profound. Power in werewolf society wasn't just about physical strength or official rank. Real power flowed through information, relationships, and the ability to influence outcomes without ever being seen as the source. By her 20th year, Elara possessed an understanding of Silver Moon pack operations that rivaled Alpha Marcus himself. The difference was that nobody knew. To the pack, she remained the wolfless Omega, the broken girl who served their meals and cleaned their spaces and existed at the periphery of their awareness. But in reality, Elara Ashwood had become the most dangerous person in pack territory. She just hadn't realized it yet. Everything accelerated when Luna Catherine died. Alpha Marcus's mate, the emotional center of the Silver Moon pack, succumbed to a wasting disease that even the pack's best healers couldn't cure. Her death left a void in pack leadership that went beyond the merely political. In werewolf culture, the Luna isn't just the alpha's mate. She's the emotional intelligence of the pack, the mediator of disputes, the keeper of traditions, the bridge between the ruthless pragmatism required of an alpha and the compassionate community that sustains pack life. Without a Luna, packs deteriorate. Conflicts escalate. Social bonds weaken. The delicate balance between hierarchy and community collapses. Alpha Marcus understood this. 6 months after Catherine's death, he announced the Luna Trials, a traditional competition where eligible she-wolves would compete for the position through a series of challenges testing strength, intelligence, wisdom, and leadership. The trials would last 3 months, culminating in the winter solstice when Marcus would choose his new mate. Every unmated female in the pack between ages 20 and 30 was required to participate, including Elara. The announcement caused an uproar. A wolfless Omega competing for the position of Luna? It was absurd. Insulting. Several high-ranking females demanded Elara's exclusion, arguing that her very presence would contaminate the sacred proceedings. But Alpha Marcus held firm. Pack law is clear. All eligible females will participate. All of them. Some whispered that Marcus was being deliberately cruel, that he wanted to humiliate Elara one final time before finding an excuse to exile her permanently. Others suggested he was making a point about pack unity, demonstrating that even the lowest member would be given theoretical opportunity. Nobody suspected the truth, that Elara's participation wasn't about her at all. It was about someone else entirely, someone who had been watching Elara for years, recognizing in this wolfless Omega something that nobody else could see. Someone who had plans that extended far beyond the Silvermoon Pack's borders. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. First, we need to understand what happened during those 3 months of trials, because that's when Elara's unseen influence began to reshape everything. Part 2. The first challenge, strength. The Luna trials opened with the most obvious test, physical combat. 27 she-wolves stood in the training arena, ranging from powerful alpha daughters to cunning beta warriors. The rules were simple. Fight in wolf form. Last female standing wins the challenge. Elara stood among them, still human, still wolfless. The other competitors ignored her, focusing on assessing their real threats. Pack spectators filled the arena's observation levels, eager to watch the high-ranking females battle for supremacy. When the challenge began, the arena exploded into controlled chaos. Wolves clashed with savage precision, alliances forming and breaking within seconds. Alpha daughter Serena demonstrated why she was the favorite, taking down 3 opponents in rapid succession. Beta warrior Mara used tactical cunning to isolate and eliminate stronger opponents. The arena floor became a showcase of werewolf combat at its finest. And Elara simply stood still. She made no move to fight. She didn't defend herself. She just observed, her face calm, her posture relaxed. Within 10 minutes, only 3 wolves remained standing. Serena, Mara, and a dark horse competitor named Lissa. They circled each other, exhausted, calculating their final moves. And then Serena's gaze landed on Elara, still standing in human form at the arena's edge. "End this farce," Serena snarled, her wolf voice distorted but understandable. "She doesn't even belong here." The crowd murmured in agreement. Alpha Marcus stood from his observation seat. "Elara Ashwood, you have not engaged in combat. Explain yourself." Elara's voice was quiet but clear. The challenge was to be the last female standing. It did not specify that combat was required. Confusion rippled through the crowd. "Are you suggesting," Beta Commander Thorne asked slowly, "that you intend to simply wait until the others eliminate each other?" "I'm suggesting that strength isn't always about fighting. Sometimes it's about understanding when not to fight." Serena laughed, the sound vicious. "This is pathetic. I'll eliminate her myself and end this embarrassment." She launched toward Elara, her wolf form massive and lethal. What happened next lasted less than 3 seconds, but it changed everything. As Serena closed the distance, Elara moved. Not away, but forward, her human body somehow reading the wolf's trajectory with impossible precision. She dropped low, rolled beneath Serena's strike, and used the wolf's own momentum to redirect her, straight into the arena wall. The impact was devastating. Serena hit the reinforced barrier with enough force to crack stone, her wolf form crumpling unconscious to the ground. The arena fell silent. Elara stood, brushing dirt from her clothes, her expression unchanged. "I said strength isn't always about fighting. Sometimes it's about understanding physics, leverage, and how to make your opponent defeat themselves." Mara and Lissa stared at her, shock evident even in their wolf forms. Then, in a move that surprised everyone, Mara shifted back to human form and bowed her head. "I yield to Elara Ashwood." Lissa hesitated only a moment before following suit. "I also yield." The crowd erupted in chaos. Alpha Marcus's expression was unreadable as he raised his hand for silence. Elara Ashwood wins the first challenge. But here's what nobody understood in that moment. Elara hadn't just won through unexpected skill. She'd won because she'd been watching Serena train for weeks, studying her attack patterns, identifying the exact vulnerability that would allow a human to defeat a transformed wolf. And she'd orchestrated the other competitors' exhaustion by deliberately placing herself as a minimal threat, allowing them to expend their energy on each other while she conserved hers. It wasn't strength that won the challenge. It was intelligence, observation, and strategic patience. The qualities nobody associated with an Omega. The qualities that would define everything that followed. The second challenge, wisdom. The second trial took place in the Pack Library, a vast collection of texts accumulated over centuries. The challenge seemed straightforward. Solve the ancient puzzle, a legendary riddle that every Luna candidate studied, but few truly understood. The puzzle involved interpreting a cryptic prophecy written in Old Tongue, a dead language that few modern wolves could read fluently. Each candidate was given 4 hours alone with the original text. The other she-wolves approached it with varying strategies. Some relied on memorized translations. Others consulted reference materials. A few attempted pure intuition. When Elara's turn came, she entered the library and immediately ignored the prophecy text. Instead, she went to the historical archives and pulled records of every previous Luna's interpretation of the puzzle. She cross-referenced their answers with the outcomes of their reigns. She analyzed patterns in interpretation versus historical context. And she discovered something nobody else had noticed. The ancient puzzle wasn't actually about the prophecy's content. It was about understanding that prophecies are living things that change meaning with context. Every Luna who had answered the puzzle correctly had interpreted it differently, because each had understood that wisdom isn't about finding the one right answer. It's about finding the right answer for your specific time and circumstances. When Elara presented her interpretation to the judging panel, she didn't offer a single solution. She offered a framework for understanding how the prophecy should be interpreted differently based on the pack's current needs, challenges, and circumstances. The elders were stunned. This is unprecedented," Elder Rosewood stammered. "You haven't answered the puzzle. You've redefined it. With respect, Elder, that's what wisdom requires. Not rigid adherence to past answers, but understanding how to adapt timeless principles to present reality." She won the challenge unanimously, and she did it by seeing beyond what everyone else was looking at. The strategic seeds. But winning challenges wasn't actually Elara's primary objective. That was just the visible layer of what she was accomplishing. Because while the pack focused on the trials, Elara was operating on a completely different level. She was using her newfound visibility, her unexpected success in the challenges, to implement a far more sophisticated strategy. Remember those years of observation? Those hidden journals mapping every relationship, every vulnerability, every hidden tension in the pack? Elara was activating that knowledge. During the strength challenge, she had deliberately positioned herself to observe a private conversation between Beta Commander Thorn and a visiting diplomat from the Shadowfang pack, Silvermoon's primary rival. The conversation revealed Thorn's secret negotiations. He was considering defection, selling Silvermoon's defensive positions in exchange for higher rank in Shadowfang. Elara didn't report this information directly. Instead, she left her position assignments notebook, the one she used to track Omega duties, in a location where Alpha Marcus's personal scout would find it. The notebook contained seemingly innocent scheduling notes, but Elara had deliberately included a page that mentioned noticing Thorn near the southern border during unauthorized hours. The seed was planted. During the Wisdom Challenge, she had arranged for Elder Rosewood's gambling debts to be discussed in her hearing by ensuring 2 creditors happened to meet near the library. She then made sure to mention to another elder, in what seemed like idle conversation, that she'd overheard concerning financial conversations. Another seed planted. She was building a web of information, strategically distributing knowledge to the right people at the right time, all while appearing to be doing nothing more than competing in trials and performing her Omega duties. Nobody noticed because nobody was looking for it. This is the genius of operating from a position of perceived weakness. Your enemies don't defend against you because they don't believe you're capable of attack. 3 weeks into the trials, the first major consequence emerged. Alpha Marcus confronted Beta Commander Thorn about his loyalty, backed by intelligence gathered from multiple sources, including the observations from Elara's lost notebook. Under pressure, Thorn confessed to his negotiations with Shadowfang. The betrayal rocked the pack's command structure. Thorn was stripped of rank and exiled. His entire family was demoted. The pack's defensive strategy had to be completely restructured because Shadowfang now knew too much. It caused chaos, but it also eliminated a corrupted element in leadership and forced the pack to strengthen its actual defenses rather than relying on compromised intelligence. Elara had turned a hidden vulnerability into an opportunity for evolution. 2 weeks later, Elder Rosewood's gambling debts came to light through a series of seemingly unconnected events, all of which Elara had subtly orchestrated. Rather than being dismissed in disgrace, Rosewood was offered rehabilitation, and his financial duties were transferred to a younger, more capable administrator. Again, Elara's fingerprints were nowhere to be found. She was simply the Omega competing in Luna trials, who happened to be in proximity to information, who happened to mention observations to people who happened to act on them. The pack was restructuring itself, becoming stronger, eliminating corruption and weakness. And nobody realized they were following a blueprint designed by the wolfless Omega they'd dismissed as irrelevant. The Unseen Alliance. But Elara wasn't working entirely alone. There was one person who had noticed her maneuvering, one person who understood what she was actually doing. His name was Cale Thornwood, and his story was almost as complicated as Elara's. Cale was Alpha Marcus's younger brother. Technically an Alpha by bloodline, but effectively exiled from succession by a complicated political history. He'd been away from Silvermoon for 5 years, traveling through other territories, studying pack dynamics across the continent. He returned 2 weeks into the Luna trials, and he was the first person to truly see Elara. Their first conversation happened in the pack library, late at night when Elara thought she was alone. "You're very good at this," Cale said from the shadows. Elara didn't startle. She'd sensed him watching for the past 10 minutes. Good at what? Playing the game while pretending not to know there's a game being played. She closed the book she'd been reading, a treatise on interpack diplomacy, and met his gaze directly. "I don't know what you mean." Cale stepped into the lamplight. He was tall, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to see too much. Unlike his brother's aggressive dominance, Cale's power was quieter, more controlled. More like Elara's. "Yes, you do," he said softly. "You orchestrated Thorn's exposure. You triggered Rosewood's investigation. You're systematically restructuring pack leadership while everyone believes they're making independent discoveries." Elara remained silent, calculating. "Relax," Cale continued. "I'm not here to expose you. I'm here to offer partnership." "Why would I need a partner?" "Because you're playing a brilliant game, but you're missing the larger context. There are forces moving in werewolf politics that go far beyond Silvermoon Pack. And whether you realize it or not, you've already attracted attention from some very dangerous people." This got Elara's full attention. What kind of attention? The kind that comes when you start disrupting established power structures. You've been operating on the assumption that your influence is invisible because nobody in this pack is looking for it. But there are others outside these borders who have much better vision. Like who? Cale smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Like the Midnight Council. Like the Alpha Convocation in the Northern Territories. Like people who have plans for the future of our kind that depend on maintaining certain power structures. Structures you're dismantling without even realizing it. Elara processed this rapidly. "And why are you telling me this?" "Because I think you're the most interesting person in this entire territory. Because I've spent 5 years studying pack politics across the continent, and I've never seen anyone with your combination of intelligence and strategic invisibility. And because," he paused, his expression becoming serious, "I think you're going to win these trials. Not because you want to be Luna, but because winning is the natural outcome of everything you're setting in motion." "I can't win," Elara said flatly. "I'm wolfless. Even if I succeed in every challenge, Alpha Marcus will never choose me as his mate." "Won't he?" Cale's smile returned. "What if Marcus doesn't actually have a choice? What if the entire pack dynamics shift so dramatically that you become not just an option, but the only viable option?" Elara stared at him, her mind racing through possibilities. You see it now, Kale said. You've been playing the game magnificently, but you've been playing to survive, maybe to gain some measure of security. What if you played to win everything? Why would you help me do that? Kale's expression became intense. Because the old ways are failing. Because werewolf society is stagnant, hierarchical, stuck in traditions that no longer serve us. Because I've been watching you operate, and I think you represent something new, a form of power that doesn't depend on brute strength or bloodline, but on intelligence, strategy, and the ability to see what others miss. He extended his hand. Partner with me. I'll teach you about the larger political landscape you're navigating. You continue doing what you do best, operating beneath notice, shifting dynamics, creating change without claiming credit. Together, we might actually reshape what it means to be a pack. Elara looked at his extended hand for a long moment. Every instinct told her this was dangerous. Kale was powerful, connected, intelligent, exactly the kind of person who could either amplify her influence or completely destroy her. But she also recognized an opportunity when she saw one. She took his hand. Partners. But we do this my way, quietly, carefully, with no unnecessary risks. I wouldn't have it any other way. That handshake changed everything. Because now Elara's unseen influence had an amplifier. Someone who understood the game she was playing and could extend her reach beyond Silvermoon's borders. The ripple effect she'd been creating was about to become a tidal wave. Part 2, the third challenge, leadership. The third Luna trial was announced with unusual drama. Alpha Marcus stood before the entire pack, his expression grave. The next challenge will test your ability to lead in crisis. Each candidate will be given command of a pack unit for 1 week. You will face a simulated emergency scenario. Your decisions, your leadership, your ability to maintain unit cohesion under pressure, all will be evaluated. The remaining candidates, now down to 7 after various eliminations, drew lots to determine their assigned units and scenarios. Elara drew the worst possible combination. She would lead the Omega Service unit during a supply crisis, a scenario where the pack faced food shortage and had to manage rationing while maintaining morale. The other candidates got military units, scouting teams, diplomatic missions, assignments that allowed them to showcase traditional leadership qualities. Elara got the least respected unit, facing the least glamorous challenge. Perfect. Because while the other candidates approached their scenarios with conventional leadership strategies, Elara saw something they missed. This was an opportunity to demonstrate that effective leadership had nothing to do with rank and everything to do with understanding people. The Omega Revolution. Elara's first act as temporary unit leader was to call a meeting with every Omega in the pack. Not just her assigned unit, every single Omega. They gathered in the communal quarters, confused and suspicious. Omegas didn't hold pack-wide meetings. They didn't organize collectively. They certainly didn't operate under the leadership of the wolfless Omega, who'd somehow become a Luna candidate. I know what you're thinking, Elara began. Why should you listen to me? I'm one of you. Lower than you, even. I don't have a wolf. I have no real authority. And this meeting could get all of us punished for organizing without permission. Murmurs of agreement. But here's what I also know. Every one of you is smarter, more skilled, and more essential to pack function than anyone acknowledges. You know things the alphas don't. You see weaknesses in our systems that leadership misses. You understand pack dynamics from a perspective that's completely invisible to those in power. She let that sink in. This challenge is supposed to test my leadership during a supply crisis. But it's actually testing something more important. Whether I understand that real leadership isn't about commanding from above. It's about coordinating the intelligence that already exists at every level. She pulled out a map of pack territory and spread it across the floor. Here's my proposal. We're going to solve the supply crisis not by rationing better, but by finding new sources. I've been observing for years, and I know for a fact that we're wasting resources because of poor coordination. Omegas in food service know what gets wasted. Omegas in maintenance know which storage areas are underutilized. Omegas in gardens know what wild resources we're ignoring. Elara pointed to specific locations on the map. Combine your knowledge. Share information across service areas. And I guarantee we'll find enough resources that rationing becomes unnecessary. An older Omega named Marcus spoke up. And if we succeed, the credit goes to you, and we remain invisible. No, Elara said firmly. If we succeed, I will ensure every alpha in this pack knows exactly who solved the problem. I will name every one of you. I will make your contributions undeniable. Because that's what real leadership looks like, elevating others, not yourself. Silence. Then a young Omega named Finn stood. I know a valley 3 miles north where wild grains grow that we've never harvested. Nobody pays attention because it's outside our normal foraging range. Another voice. The cold storage in Sector 7 is half empty because of poor allocation planning. We could reorganize it to prevent spoilage. More voices joined in, creating a cascade of information that had existed all along, but had never been coordinated, never been valued. Within 2 hours, they had a comprehensive resource management plan that would not only solve the supply crisis, but actually improve pack nutrition and efficiency. Elara looked at the assembled Omegas, these brilliant, overlooked people who had just demonstrated exactly what she'd been trying to prove. Make it happen, she said, and document everything. Every decision, every discovery, every contribution. When this challenge ends, I want irrefutable evidence of what Omegas can accomplish when given the opportunity. They dispersed with unprecedented purpose. And Kale, who had been watching from the shadows, smiled. You're not just winning challenges, he said as the room emptied. You're starting a revolution. Not a revolution, Elara corrected. An evolution. Revolutions are loud and violent. Evolutions are quiet and inevitable. The specific instances of influence. While the Omega unit executed their resource plan, Elara worked with Kale to extend her influence into areas that seemed completely unrelated to the Luna trials. This is where her years of observation translated into surgical precision. Instance 1. The Shadowfang negotiation. Remember the Shadowfang pack, Silvermoon's primary rival? Beta Commander Thorn's betrayal had revealed that Shadowfang was planning aggressive expansion into Silvermoon territory. Alpha Marcus was preparing for potential war, consulting with his military advisors on defensive strategy. But Elara recognized something the War Council didn't. The intelligence from Thorn's betrayal suggested that Shadowfang's Alpha, a wolf named Darius Blackmoon, wasn't actually planning an invasion. He was positioning for a negotiation, using the threat of force to gain concessions in an upcoming territorial treaty. The problem was that if Marcus responded militarily, Shadowfang would be forced to follow through on their threats. The aggressive posturing would become actual conflict. Elara couldn't directly advise Alpha Marcus. She had no standing in military discussions. But she could influence the information he received. She crafted a letter, supposedly from an anonymous source within Shadowfang territory, detailing their economic vulnerabilities and suggesting that their aggressive posture was actually defensive desperation. She arranged for this letter to reach Marcus's desk through a circuitous route that made it seem like genuine intelligence rather than planted information. Then she did something more subtle. She mentioned to Kale, in a conversation she knew would be overheard by Marcus's scout, that she'd read about historical precedents where apparent aggression was actually a negotiating tactic. She cited specific examples from pack history, making it seem like academic observation rather than strategic advice. The combination of planted intelligence and historical context gave Marcus the framework to reconsider his response. Instead of mobilizing for war, he sent diplomatic envoys. The negotiations succeeded. Shadowfang got minor territorial concessions. Silvermoon avoided a costly conflict. And nobody knew that the strategic shift originated from a wolfless Omega's unseen influence. Instance 2. The Alliance Network. Kale's connections across other territories became Elara's extended sensing network. Through him, she learned that multiple packs were watching the Silvermoon Luna trials with interest, particularly her unexpected success. Some saw it as a amusing anomaly. Others saw it as a potentially dangerous precedent. Elara recognized an opportunity. She asked Kale to arrange discreet conversations with progressive elements in other packs, younger alphas and betas who were frustrated with traditional hierarchy, who had their own ideas about modernizing werewolf society. These conversations weren't diplomatic missions. They were seeds. Elara shared her observations about pack dynamics, her ideas about leadership, her vision for a society where power came from intelligence and contribution rather than bloodline and brute force. She didn't ask for support. She didn't request alliance. She simply shared ideas and let them spread organically. Within weeks, whispers began circulating through interpack communication networks. Young progressives in 5 different territories started questioning their own hierarchical structures. Discussions emerged about alternative governance models. Elara was creating an invisible movement, not by leading it directly, but by planting concepts in fertile ground and letting them grow. Instance 3. The Luna candidate elimination. As the trials progressed, Elara recognized that several remaining candidates posed genuine threats, not because they might win, but because their victory would harm the pack. Serena, the alpha daughter who had been the early favorite, was brilliant in combat but psychologically unstable. Her private conversations, which Elara overheard through strategic positioning during Omega duties, revealed a disturbing worldview. She saw Luna position as a path to absolute power, with plans to marginalize anyone who might threaten her authority. If Serena became Luna, she would turn Silvermoon into an oppressive regime. Elara couldn't directly eliminate her from the trials without evidence and authority she didn't possess. But she could create conditions where Serena eliminated herself. Through careful observation, Elara had learned that Serena's primary weakness was her pride. She couldn't tolerate being outmaneuvered, especially by those she considered inferior. During the 4th challenge, a complex negotiation scenario, Elara deliberately appeared to make a strategic mistake. She proposed a solution that seemed naive and easily exploitable. Serena, seeing an opportunity to humiliate Elara, attacked the proposal viciously in front of the entire judging panel, revealing in her critique the full extent of her authoritarian philosophy. She didn't realize she was exposing herself. The elders heard not just criticism of Elara's proposal, but a comprehensive worldview that celebrated domination over collaboration, punishment over rehabilitation, fear over respect. By the time Serena finished her tirade, she had disqualified herself through her own words. Alpha Marcus dismissed her from the trials that evening, and Elara's naive proposal, when examined more carefully, turned out to be surprisingly sophisticated. It had simply been presented in a way that invited arrogant opponents to reveal themselves. Instance 4. The economic transformation. Remember Elder Rosewood's gambling debts and the financial crisis Elara had helped expose? The new financial administrator, a sharp young beta named Cordelia, discovered that Silvermoon's economic foundation was far weaker than anyone realized. The pack had been operating on outdated resource management systems, missing opportunities for trade, failing to capitalize on their territorial advantages. Cordelia was competent, but overwhelmed by the scope of reform needed. Elara couldn't directly advise her. An Omega offering financial strategy to a Beta would be dismissed immediately. But she could leave research materials where Cordelia would find them. She could mention historical examples of successful pack economies during her service duties. She could ask seemingly innocent questions that directed attention to overlooked opportunities. I was reading about the Northern Territories, Elara mentioned once while serving Cordelia's meal. Did you know they generate significant revenue from medicinal herbs that grow in their forests? I wonder if our territory has similar resources. Casual observation. Easily dismissed. Except Cordelia was smart enough to investigate. Within weeks, she had identified 3 new revenue streams for Silvermoon: medicinal herbs, specialized timber, and a rare mineral deposit, none of which had been exploited because nobody had thought to look for them. The pack's economic situation transformed from precarious to robust, and Cordelia received all the credit, never knowing that a wolfless Omega had pointed her in the right direction. This was Elara's method. Identify competent people, give them the information they need to succeed, let them take full credit for the results. It built a network of successful allies who owed their achievements to information they didn't realize came from her. Invisible influence compounding across multiple domains. The power of perceived insignificance. There's a phenomenon in pack dynamics that Elara understood better than anyone. People reveal their true selves to those they consider beneath them. Alphas spoke freely about strategy in front of Omega servants, assuming the help couldn't possibly understand the implications. Betas discussed alliances and betrayals while Omegas served their meals, believing the conversation was functionally private. Elders debated policy in the pack house, while cleaners moved through the rooms like furniture, invisible and dismissed. This created a massive intelligence advantage. Elara knew about Alpha Marcus's insecurities regarding his brother Kale. She understood which pack members were loyal versus merely obedient. She had overheard countless private conversations about the Luna trials, learning exactly what each elder valued, what each faction wanted, what hidden agendas were being pursued. And she used this information with surgical precision. When Elder Blackthorn expressed concerns about Silvermoon's vulnerability to the northern pacts, Elara arranged for him to discover historical records about ancient defensive pacts. This led to renewed diplomatic efforts that strengthened Silvermoon's position. When Beta Commander Lissa worried about training quality, Elara left tactical manuals from other territories where they would be found, prompting reforms that improved combat preparedness. When Alpha Marcus struggled with loneliness after his mate's death, Elara ensured he encountered pack members who reminded him of positive memories, subtly rebuilding his emotional foundation. Every intervention was invisible. Every success belonged to someone else. Every improvement seemed to emerge organically from the pack's own initiative. But the cumulative effect was extraordinary. Silvermoon Pack was transforming, becoming stronger, more efficient, more unified, and nobody could point to a single cause. They certainly never suspected it was the wolfless Omega who served their meals and cleaned their spaces. The methods of communication and persuasion. Elara's genius wasn't just in what she did, but in how she did it. She developed a sophisticated system for influencing outcomes without direct presence. The lost document method. She would accidentally leave research materials, notes, or historical records in locations where specific people would find them. The materials were always genuine and valuable, never obvious plants. The finder would believe they had discovered something through their own initiative. The overheard conversation technique. She would arrange for key information to be discussed within hearing range of specific people, but never directed at them. Humans and werewolves trust information they overhear more than information they're told directly. The innocent question strategy. She would ask seemingly naive questions that directed attention to overlooked problems or opportunities. I was wondering, or do you think, or I read somewhere that. These questions planted ideas while positioning Elara as curious rather than directive. The third-party validation method. She would ensure that her ideas reached targets through trusted intermediaries. If she wanted Alpha Marcus to consider a strategy, she would ensure that his most trusted advisor encountered information that led them to suggest it independently. The historical precedent approach. She constantly cited examples from pack history, making suggestions seem like traditional wisdom rather than novel ideas. This made innovations feel safe and legitimate. Every method had one thing in common: plausible deniability. If anyone had traced the influence back to its source, they would find only innocent coincidences, helpful observations, and fortunate discoveries. Never direct manipulation. Never obvious control. Just an accumulation of small nudges that reshaped pack dynamics while remaining invisible. As Elara's partnership with Kale deepened, their dynamic became increasingly complex. Kale was brilliant in his own right. A strategic thinker with connections across multiple territories, political acumen that rivaled any alpha, and a vision for werewolf society that aligned with Elara's instincts. But he was also an alpha by bloodline, which meant his worldview had blind spots. He understood power structures from the perspective of someone who had always had access to power, even if he'd chosen not to fully claim it. He could navigate elite politics, but sometimes missed the undercurrents visible only from the bottom of the hierarchy. Elara saw what he couldn't see. Kale could amplify what she couldn't reach directly. Their late-night strategy sessions in the pack library became legendary among those who knew about them, which was precisely nobody except themselves. "You're thinking too directly," Elara would say, reviewing one of Kale's proposals. "If you approach the Northern Council with this treaty language, they'll see it as Silvermoon asserting dominance. Reframe it as mutual defense. Acknowledge their ancestral claims to the disputed territory, even as we secure access rights." "You're thinking too small," Kale would counter. "This economic reform you're suggesting for Silvermoon, it could be a model for 5 other packs. Stop limiting your vision to one territory." "I'm not limiting my vision. I'm understanding that change has to prove itself before it can spread. Silvermoon succeeds first, then others adopt the model voluntarily. That could take years. Evolution takes time. Revolution is fast but fragile." Their debates were intellectual sparring matches that sharpened both of their strategic thinking. But there was something else developing between them, something neither of them had planned for. Kale was falling in love with Elara, and Elara was terrified that acknowledging it would compromise everything she'd built. It started subtly, Cale's gaze lingering a moment too long. His concern when Elara took risks in her maneuvering. The way he positioned himself protectively during pack gatherings, even though Elara didn't need protection. Elara noticed, of course. She noticed everything, but she didn't know how to process it. Romance was a complication she hadn't factored into her strategies. Emotional attachment created vulnerabilities, and Cale wasn't just any potential partner. He was Alpha Marcus's brother, a powerful political figure, someone whose association with her could either validate or completely undermine her position. One night, after a particularly successful strategic operation, Cale broke the professional boundary. "You're extraordinary," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Not just your intelligence or your strategy. You, the person who survived rejection and isolation and turned it into power that nobody else could have imagined. You're the most remarkable person I've ever known." Elara's heart raced, but her expression remained controlled. "Cale, this isn't." "I know," he interrupted. "I know this complicates everything. I know you don't need this distraction. I know I'm probably the worst possible person for you to be involved with, given the political implications. But I needed to tell you, because you deserve to know that someone sees you, really sees you. Not the Omega, not the Luna candidate, not the strategic genius. You." Elara was silent for a long moment. "If I acknowledge this," she said finally, "it changes the entire dynamic. Partnership becomes something more complicated. Decisions get clouded by emotion. Strategic choices become influenced by personal attachment. I know, and if anyone discovers a romantic connection between us during the Luna trials, it invalidates everything. They'll say I'm manipulating outcomes through you, using your family connection, that my success is fabricated. I know that too. So what exactly are you asking for?" Cale moved closer, his expression intense. "I'm asking for nothing. I'm offering everything. Use me however you need to for your strategies. Ignore what I've said if that's easier. But know that when this is all over, when you've achieved whatever you're building toward, I'll still be here, seeing you, wanting to be part of your life, not your strategy." Elara's carefully constructed emotional walls trembled. She had spent so many years alone, invisible, touching the world only through indirect influence. The idea that someone could see her, truly see her, and still want proximity. It was intoxicating and terrifying. "After the trials," she said quietly. "We'll revisit this conversation after the trials, when the strategic landscape is clearer." "After the trials," Cale agreed. But they both knew something fundamental had shifted. The unseen influence was being seen by at least one person. And that changed everything. Part 4. The fifth challenge, the impossible choice. The penultimate Luna challenge was designed to break candidates. Alpha Marcus stood before the remaining 3 she-wolves. Elara, a skilled diplomat named Cassandra, and a warrior healer named Raven. "The final challenges will test your judgment under pressure," Marcus announced. "Each of you will face a scenario with no good outcome. You must choose between 2 terrible options, and your choice will reveal your priorities, your values, your fitness to lead." Elara's scenario was brutal in its simplicity. She was presented with a hypothetical. A neighboring pack has attacked Silvermoon territory. 20 wolves are trapped behind enemy lines, including 5 children. A rescue mission has 90% chance of failure and would expose Silvermoon's main defensive position. The alternative is to abandon the trapped wolves and preserve the defensive advantage. Save the 20 wolves and risk the entire pack. Or sacrifice 20 to protect hundreds. The scenario was designed to be unwinnable. Traditional alpha thinking would prioritize pack survival. Sacrifice the 20, maintain the defense. But Luna candidates were expected to value every life, to find creative solutions, to refuse the binary choice. Cassandra and Raven had already given their answers. Cassandra chose pack survival, articulating a cold but logical argument about leadership requiring terrible choices. Raven chose the rescue mission, arguing that a Luna must never abandon pack members, that maintaining moral authority was more important than tactical advantage. Both answers were respectable within different value frameworks. Elara looked at the scenario for a long time. Then she said, "This scenario is designed to force a false choice. But the real failure occurred before these options existed. How did 20 wolves, including children, end up trapped behind enemy lines? What intelligence failure allowed enemy forces to penetrate our territory? What defensive gaps enabled this situation? Alpha Marcus frowned. You're avoiding the question. No, I'm identifying the actual problem. This scenario asks me to choose between two catastrophic outcomes that resulted from earlier failures. Aluna's job isn't to make impossible choices. It's to prevent impossible choices from occurring in the first place. That's evasion. With respect, Alpha, it's leadership. You've presented a crisis scenario and asked me to manage the crisis. But crisis management is failure. Success is building systems robust enough that these scenarios don't develop. She pulled out a map, one she'd prepared specifically for this possibility. If this situation occurred in actual Silvermoon territory, it means our enemy exploited the gap between patrol sectors 7 and 9. I've been observing patrol patterns for years, and I know we have a vulnerability there. I also know that families with children are housed in Sector 12, which means the enemy somehow penetrated 3 defensive layers. She marked positions on the map. If I were Luna, this situation wouldn't exist because I would have already identified these gaps, restructured patrol patterns, and repositioned vulnerable families. The scenario you've presented is impossible in a properly managed pack. The silence in the room was absolute. Elder Blackthorn finally spoke. That's an unprecedented answer. It's the only answer that makes sense, Elara replied. A Luna who has to choose between saving 20 wolves or protecting hundreds has already failed. A true Luna prevents that choice from ever existing. Alpha Marcus's expression was unreadable. What if the situation exists anyway? Despite perfect planning, despite robust systems, sometimes crisis happens. What then? Elara met his gaze directly. Then I save the 20 wolves and trust that the systems I've built are strong enough to survive the tactical disadvantage. Because a Luna who abandons pack members sends a message that some lives are expendable. And that message destroys pack unity more thoroughly than any tactical loss. She paused. But I would also ensure that the rescue operation was structured to minimize the intelligence exposure. Use it as an opportunity to feed false information about our defensive positions. Turn the crisis into a strategic advantage by controlling what the enemy learns. Marcus stared at her for a long moment. You've thought about this extensively. I've thought about everything extensively. It's what invisible people do. We have a lot of time to think. Later, Kale found her in the library. That was remarkable, he said. And dangerous. You essentially told Alpha Marcus that the scenario he designed was stupid. I told him the truth, Elara corrected. Leadership isn't about making impossible choices. It's about preventing them. And if he takes offense, then he's not the Alpha Silvermoon needs. Kale laughed. You've gone from surviving to holding the pack's leadership accountable for competence. That's quite an evolution. Evolution, Elara reminded him, is quiet and inevitable. The accumulated influence becomes undeniable. By the 6th week of trials, something unprecedented was happening in Silvermoon Pack. The changes Elara had been orchestrating were reaching critical mass. The Omega Resource Management Program had proven so successful that it was being expanded pack-wide. The economic reforms she'd subtly guided had stabilized finances and generated new revenue. The diplomatic connections Kale was facilitating on her behalf had created alliance opportunities that strengthened Silvermoon's regional position. The patrol restructuring she'd suggested through indirect channels had eliminated the defensive gaps that had been vulnerabilities for years. The pack was stronger, more efficient, more prosperous than it had been in decades. And people were starting to notice the correlation. It's strange, Elder Rosewood commented during a council meeting Elara happened to overhear while serving refreshments. All these improvements began around the time the Luna trials started. Coincidence, another elder replied. We've simply had more attention on pack operations. Perhaps, but I've been reviewing the origins of each reform. They all trace back to small observations, found documents, overheard suggestions. And the common factor in many of them is proximity to. He trailed off, glancing at Elara, who was quietly refilling water pitchers. The Omega? Beta Commander Lissa said skeptically. You think a wolfless Omega is responsible for pack-wide reforms? Not responsible, but present. There's a pattern. Decisions improve when she's nearby. That's absurd. Probably. Still strange, though. Elara kept her expression neutral, her movements unremarkable. But she knew. The influence was becoming visible. The question was whether that visibility would empower her or destroy her. The tipping point came during the 7th week, in a way nobody predicted. Shadowfang Pack, the rival territory that Elara had helped negotiate peace with, violated the treaty. They launched a surprise raid on Silvermoon's southern border, killing 3 patrol wolves and capturing 2 others. It was an act of war. Alpha Marcus his war council immediately. The pack house erupted into chaos as military leaders debated response strategies. The dominant voices called for immediate retaliation, full mobilization, a decisive show of strength. Kale was in the war council, arguing for restraint and investigation. Elara was not. She was an Omega, not a strategic advisor. But she was listening from the kitchen where she was supposed to be preparing meals for the council. And she recognized something the war council was missing. The attack didn't make strategic sense for Shadowfang. Their alpha, Darius Black Moon, had negotiated in good faith. His pack had honored the treaty for weeks. He had nothing to gain from violating it now, which meant this wasn't a pack-sanctioned attack. It was a rogue element within Shadowfang, or a false flag operation by a third party trying to trigger conflict. But how could she communicate this to the war council without revealing how much she knew, how much she'd been observing, how much intelligence she'd accumulated? She couldn't enter the council chamber. She had no official standing. If she spoke up, she'd be dismissed as an Omega overstepping her place. Unless she operated through the channels she'd been building for months. Elara moved quickly. She found Elder Blackthorn in the hallway and mentioned, with perfect timing and carefully crafted concern, that she'd overheard something strange from a visiting trader. Rumors of a rogue Shadowfang faction that had been expelled by their alpha. She ensured that Beta Commander Lissa encountered a document about historical false flag operations used to trigger interpack wars. She asked Kale, in a message that appeared to be about something else entirely, to investigate the specific wolves involved in the attack. Within 30 minutes, 3 separate members of the War Council had received information suggesting the attack might not be what it appeared. The aggressive response was paused. Investigation was authorized. And within 2 hours, the truth emerged. The attack had been carried out by exiled Shadowfang wolves working with a third pack that wanted Silvermoon and Shadowfang to destroy each other. Crisis averted. War prevented. Alliance with Shadowfang actually strengthened, because both packs had been targeted by the same enemy. Alpha Marcus addressed the War Council. This investigation saved us from making a catastrophic mistake. We owe thanks to those who insisted on verification before retaliation. He looked around the room at his advisors, at Kale, at the elders who had urged caution. But Elder Blackthorn spoke up. Alpha, with respect, the first piece of intelligence came from an Omega who overheard traitor gossip. Perhaps we should thank her as well. Silence. The suggestion that an Omega, that Elara specifically, had contributed to a military strategic decision was unprecedented. Bring her in, Marcus said finally. Moments later, Elara stood before the War Council, still wearing her service apron, very aware that she was the only Omega who had ever entered this room during an active council session. You reported information about rogue Shadowfang elements, Marcus said. How did you come across this intelligence? Elara chose her words carefully. I serve traders when they visit Pack House. They talk freely around serving staff. I simply paid attention and reported what seemed relevant. And you understood the strategic implications? I understood that attack patterns matter. That context determines response. That jumping to conclusions causes more damage than investigation. Marcus studied her for a long moment. You're full of surprises, Elara Ashwood. I'm simply observant, Alpha. Clearly. He dismissed her, but the damage, or perhaps the revelation, was done. The War Council had just acknowledged that a wolfless Omega had provided critical intelligence. The invisible influence had become partially visible, and everything was about to accelerate. The realization spreads. Over the next few days, something shifted in how pack members perceived Elara. People started paying attention. They noticed her presence at key moments. They remembered conversations where she'd made seemingly innocent observations that had turned out to be remarkably prescient. They began connecting dots that had been invisible before. She was there when we discovered the medicinal herb opportunity, Cordelia mentioned to another beta. She asked a question about Northern Territory resources. She served the meal where we discussed patrol restructuring, a military officer recalled. Made a comment about historical defensive patterns. She was cleaning the library when I found those economic treatises. Elder Rosewood remembered. Suggested I might find them interesting. The pattern was becoming undeniable, but opinion was split on what it meant. Some saw it as evidence of extraordinary intelligence and situational awareness, an omega who had turned her invisible status into strategic advantage. Others saw it as manipulation, an omega who had been secretly controlling pack operations through deception. The pack divided into factions, those who admired Elara's abilities and those who feared them. And Alpha Marcus found himself at the center of an unprecedented question. Could a wolfless omega become Luna? The political earthquake. The debate erupted during a council session that was supposed to address treaty negotiations with the Northern Territories. Elder Hawthorne raised the forbidden question. Alpha Marcus, we need to discuss the implications of the Luna trials. Specifically, we need to discuss Elara Ashwood. The room tensed. What about her? Marcus asked, his tone carefully neutral. She has won or placed highly in every challenge. She has demonstrated intelligence, leadership, strategic thinking. By the traditional metrics of the trials, she is the strongest candidate. She's also wolfless, another elder countered. A Luna without a wolf is unprecedented. It violates every tradition. Tradition, Kale interjected, isn't the same as law. Pack law states that Luna must demonstrate strength, wisdom, and leadership. It doesn't specify that she must possess a wolf. That's a technicality. That's the law as written. The argument escalated. Pack members who had been watching the proceedings began taking sides. Some defended Elara based on her demonstrated abilities. Others insisted that a wolfless Luna would undermine pack identity. Alpha Marcus raised his hand for silence. The real question, he said slowly, isn't whether Elara Ashwood is qualified by trial performance. The question is whether her influence over the past weeks has been genuine contribution or manipulation. Because if she's been orchestrating outcomes without authority, that's a violation of pack hierarchy that cannot be tolerated. He turned to face Elara, who had been standing silently in her usual position at the room's edge. Elara Ashwood stepped forward. She moved to the center of the council chamber. I've been reviewing the pattern Elder Blackthorn identified. The reforms, the intelligence, the strategic decisions, they all have your proximity in common. So I'm asking you directly. Have you been manipulating pack operations? The question was a trap. Answer yes, and she confesses to violating hierarchy. Answer no, and she's lying. Elara met Alpha Marcus's gaze directly. I have been observing pack operations for years. I have been identifying patterns, recognizing opportunities, and sharing information when appropriate. If that constitutes manipulation, then yes, I'm guilty. If it constitutes contribution, then I have been serving this pack to the best of my abilities despite being denied formal recognition. You admit to influencing decisions above your station? I admit to making observations that others use to make their own decisions. I have never claimed authority I don't possess. I have never made decisions for others. I have simply provided information and perspective that would otherwise have been missed. From the position of an omega, operating outside official channels. From the position of someone who sees what others miss because they're not looking. You asked why our reforms have been successful. It's because for the first time, someone paid attention to the intelligence that exists at every level of pack operations, not just at the top. Beta Commander Lissa spoke up. She has a point, Alpha. Every reform she's been connected to has worked. Our pack is stronger now than it's been in years. If that's manipulation, perhaps we need more of it. Or, Elder Blackthorn countered, perhaps we need to acknowledge that someone has been operating a shadow government without oversight, and that's fundamentally dangerous regardless of positive outcomes. The council descended into argument again, and Elara realized this was the moment that would determine everything. The tipping point where her accumulated influence either legitimized her position or destroyed her completely. The speech that changed everything. Alpha Marcus let the argument continue for several minutes before raising his hand again. Enough. We're not resolving this through debate. We're resolving it through transparency. He looked at Elara. You claim you've been observing and sharing information. Prove it. Give me a complete accounting of every significant decision you've influenced over the past year. Names, methods, outcomes. Everything. It was a test she couldn't pass. If she revealed the full extent of her influence, she'd expose herself as having been far more involved than anyone suspected. She'd confirm the worst fears of those who saw her as a manipulator. But if she refused or minimized her involvement, she'd be caught in a lie that would destroy her credibility. Kale started to object, but Elara stopped him with a gesture. She had spent years being invisible, operating through indirect influence, hiding the full extent of her intelligence and capability. But maybe invisibility was no longer the right strategy. Maybe the tipping point required complete transparency. Alpha Marcus, she said clearly, I'll do better than in accounting. I'll explain exactly what I've been doing and why. She moved to the center of the room, and for the first time in her life, commanded the attention of the entire pack leadership not through indirect influence, but through direct presence. I've been studying this pack since I was old enough to understand what observation meant. Not because I planned to manipulate outcomes, but because understanding my environment was the only form of power available to someone like me. An Omega, wolfless, invisible. She pulled out one of her hidden journals, a calculated risk, revealing the documentation she'd been keeping. I mapped pack dynamics, relationships, tensions, opportunities, vulnerabilities. Not to exploit them, but to understand them. And over time, I recognized something. This pack was failing not because of incompetent leadership, but because information only flowed upward through official channels. The intelligence that exists at every level, Omega observations, trader gossip, junior patrol insights, was being lost. She opened the journal, showing the detailed notes. So I began creating unofficial channels. When I noticed Beta Commander Thorne's suspicious behavior, I ensured that information reached you through someone you'd trust. When I recognized Elder Rosewood's financial crisis, I arranged for intervention. When I saw opportunities for economic improvement, I left research where people who could act on it would find it. She looked around the council chamber. I influenced decisions. I'm not denying that. But I did it by sharing information, by creating contexts where people made their own informed choices. I never forced outcomes. I never claimed authority. I simply made sure that the intelligence collected by the most invisible members of this pack, the Omegas, the servants, the people you don't see, actually informed the decisions that affect all of us. Elder Hawthorne leaned forward. You're saying you've been operating an intelligence network. I'm saying I've been paying attention and sharing what I learned. If that's an intelligence network, then yes. If it's just competent observation and helpful suggestions, then I've been doing what any pack member should do. Through manipulation and deception. Through the only channels available to someone without official authority. You want transparency? Here it is. I've been more valuable to this pack as an invisible Omega than most of your official advisors. Our reforms work because they're based on complete information, not just what filters up through hierarchy. Our strategies succeed because they account for perspectives you'd never otherwise consider. She closed the journal. You asked if I've been manipulating pack operations. The answer is yes. But so has every person in this room. The difference is that my manipulation made things better, and I did it without any of the authority, recognition, or reward that official positions provide. The silence was profound. Then Alpha Marcus did something unexpected. He laughed. Not mockery, but genuine amusement mixed with something like respect. You're telling me that for years, a wolfless Omega has been running the most effective intelligence operation in Silvermoon territory, and nobody noticed because we were all too busy maintaining hierarchy to pay attention? Yes, Alpha. That's exactly what I'm telling you. He shook his head, still smiling. And you think this qualifies you to be Luna? I think it proves I already am. A Luna creates unity, gathers intelligence, improves pack welfare, mediates conflicts, and builds strength through connection rather than domination. I've been doing that for years. The only question is whether you're willing to acknowledge it. The council chamber erupted again, but this time the dynamic had shifted. Because Elara hadn't defended herself through denial or minimization. She'd owned every bit of her influence and dared them to reject competence because of tradition. And that changed the entire conversation. Part 5. The final challenge, revelation. Alpha Marcus called for a 3-day recess before the final Luna challenge. The pack was in turmoil. Elara's revelation had fractured opinions completely. The traditionalists were outraged. A wolfless Omega had been manipulating pack operations, and she'd admitted it openly. The progressives were exhilarated. Finally, someone was challenging the rigid hierarchy that stifled pack potential. The debates raged in every corner of pack territory. And at the center of it all, Elara waited. She'd made her move. She'd revealed herself. Now she had to live with the consequences. Kale found her in the garden, where she was tending the herb beds that provided medicine for the pack healers. That was either brilliant or suicidal, he said, sitting beside her. I honestly can't tell which. Neither can I, Elara admitted. But I couldn't keep operating invisibly. The influence had become too visible. I had to own it or be destroyed by it. And if the pack rejects you, then I'll have spoken my truth. That's more than I had before. Kale took her hand, a gesture he'd avoided during the trials, but which now felt necessary. I meant what I said before. Whatever happens, I'm with you. Even if it means opposing your brother? Marcus isn't wrong to question what you've done, but he's also not wrong to recognize that you've been valuable. The pack is stronger because of you. That matters more than tradition. Elara squeezed his hand, allowing herself a moment of vulnerability. I'm terrified. Good. It means you understand the stakes. What if I've miscalculated? What if I've pushed too far? Then we adapt. But Elara, you've been preparing for this moment your entire life. You've studied pack dynamics more thoroughly than anyone alive. If anyone can navigate this, it's you. I don't know if that's comforting or terrifying. Can it be both? She smiled despite herself. I suppose it can. They sat in silence for a while, surrounded by herbs and the late afternoon sunlight. Tomorrow, Alpha Marcus would announce the final challenge. And everything Elara had built would either be validated or destroyed. The final challenge, unity. When the pack gathered for the final trial announcement, the tension was palpable. The remaining candidates stood before Alpha Marcus, Elara, Cassandra, and Raven. 3 very different she-wolves representing 3 very different visions of leadership. Marcus looked exhausted, like he'd been awake for days wrestling with decisions. The final challenge, he began, was supposed to test your ability to unify the pack behind a common purpose. But recent events have revealed that this test is unnecessary. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. We are already divided. Divided over tradition versus progress. Divided over hierarchy versus merit. Divided over what it means to be a pack in a changing world. He looked at each candidate in turn. So the final challenge is this: heal that division. Each of you will present your vision for Silvermoon's future. Not just pretty words, but a genuine framework for addressing the conflicts we're facing. The candidate who demonstrates the clearest path to unity will win not just my selection, but the pack's legitimacy. He paused. You have 3 days. Use them wisely. Cassandra's vision, tradition reimagined. Cassandra spoke first, presenting a vision rooted in werewolf tradition but adapted for modern circumstances. She was eloquent, respectful of the past while acknowledging present needs. Her framework emphasized maintaining hierarchy while creating better pathways for capable wolves to rise regardless of birth rank. She proposed formal mentorship programs, merit-based advancement opportunities, and clearer standards for leadership selection. It was a solid, sensible vision that satisfied neither progressives nor traditionalists completely, but offered reasonable compromise. The pack received it with moderate approval. Raven's vision, warrior's honor. Raven presented a vision centered on strength, discipline, and military excellence. She argued that pack survival depended on combat readiness, that werewolf identity was fundamentally tied to warrior culture, that honoring these roots would provide the unity Marcus sought. Her vision was passionate and resonated with the military factions and traditionalists who valued strength above all else. She proposed expanded training programs, a return to ancient warrior codes, and leadership selection based on combat prowess and tactical brilliance. It was an inspiring vision for those who saw the wolf as primarily a warrior. The pack received it with strong enthusiasm from about 40% of those gathered, and skepticism from the rest. Elara's vision, the revolution that wasn't. When Elara's turn came, she didn't stand at the elevated speaker's platform. She stood on the same level as everyone else. I'm not going to present a vision, she began, and shocked silence followed. Because that's not what this pack needs. You don't need another leader telling you what your future should look like. She looked around at the assembled wolves, alphas, betas, omegas, all gathered in the ceremonial circle. For the past 3 days, I've been listening. Really listening. Not to what people say in official council meetings, but to what they say in their homes, in the training grounds, in the markets, in the places where real pack life happens. She pulled out her journals, all of them this time, years of documentation. And here's what I've learned. This pack isn't divided because we disagree about the future. We're divided because different groups are having completely different experiences of pack life, and we're not actually talking to each other about it. She opened one journal. The alphas and senior betas experience Silver Moon as a strong, functional hierarchy where merit and ability are generally rewarded. From their perspective, the system works. She opened another. The younger betas and middle-rank wolves experience Silver Moon as a pack where talent often goes unrecognized because of bloodline politics, where advancement depends as much on family connections as capability. From their perspective, the system is frustrating but tolerable. She opened a third. The Omegas experience Silver Moon as a place where they're invisible, where their contributions go unacknowledged, where their intelligence is dismissed because of their rank. From their perspective, the system is oppressive. She closed the journals. 3 different packs, occupying the same territory. And we're surprised we can't agree on a unified vision. She started walking through the crowd, making eye contact with wolves at every level. Cassandra's vision is good for wolves who already have some power and want better pathways to more. Raven's vision is good for wolves who find identity through combat and want to emphasize that strength. But neither vision addresses the fundamental problem. We're not actually one pack. We're a hierarchy pretending to be a community. She stopped in the center of the circle. So here's what I propose. Not a vision, but a process. A way of actually becoming one pack instead of several layers tolerating each other. She gestured to the journals. I've been collecting intelligence from every level of pack life for years. What if that became official? What if we created structures where information flows in all directions, not just up the hierarchy? Where Omega observations inform alpha decisions, where junior patrol insights shape senior strategy, where serving staff have formal channels to report what they notice. Murmurs spread through the crowd, some interested, some skeptical. I'm talking about expanding the Omega resource program that succeeded during the trials, making it permanent, creating cross-rank working groups for every major pack function, security, economics, diplomacy, resource management. Not replacing hierarchy, but augmenting it with actual communication. She met Alpha Marcus's gaze. The Luna trials revealed something important. When you give capable wolves at every rank the opportunity to contribute meaningfully, the entire pack benefits. Our economic reforms worked because we used Omega knowledge. Our diplomatic successes came from intelligence gathered by serving staff. Our military improvements came from junior patrol insights. She spread her arms, encompassing the entire gathering. So my vision is this. What if we stop pretending that wisdom and capability only exist at the top of the hierarchy? What if we built structures that let every wolf contribute at the level of their competence, regardless of their rank? What if we became a pack where being Omega means you have different responsibilities, not that you're less valuable? The silence was profound. I can't promise this will be comfortable, Elara continued. Alphas will have to listen to perspectives they'd rather ignore. Betas will have to work with Omegas as equals in specific contexts. Omegas will have to take responsibility for contributing instead of just complaining. Everyone will have to give up the comfort of their current position. She paused. But the alternative is what we have now, a pack divided by experience, held together by hierarchy, getting weaker every year as our best talents are wasted because they don't fit traditional power structures. Elder Blackthorn stood. You're proposing to dismantle the hierarchy that has sustained werewolf society for millennia. No, Elder. I'm proposing to supplement it. Alphas still lead. Betas still manage. Omegas still serve. But we add communication structures that let everyone's intelligence inform decisions. We keep hierarchy where it works and add collaboration where hierarchy fails. And if it fails, if this supplemented hierarchy creates chaos, then we adapt, we iterate, we learn. That's what real strength looks like. Not rigid adherence to failing systems, but the courage to evolve when evolution is necessary. She looked around at the assembled pack. I'm not asking you to trust that this will work perfectly. I'm asking you to acknowledge that what we're doing now isn't working for everyone, and that we're strong enough to try something better. The moment of choice. Alpha Marcus stood silent for a long time after Elara finished speaking. The pack waited, tension building with every passing second. Finally, he spoke. In all my years as Alpha, I've never heard a Luna candidate refuse to present a vision. I've never heard someone propose not leadership, but partnership. I've never heard anyone suggest that the Alpha might not have all the answers. He looked at Elara with an expression that was hard to read. It's either the most honest thing anyone has said in this territory, or the most arrogant. It's honest, Alpha, Elara replied. You're brilliant, capable, and dedicated. But you can't see everything. Nobody can. That's not a criticism. It's just reality. The question is whether we build systems that account for that reality or pretend it doesn't exist. Marcus turned to address the entire pack. I called these trials to find a Luna who could unite us. What I didn't expect was to find someone who would challenge my fundamental assumptions about what unity means. He paused, and Elara's heart raced. This was it. The moment everything would be decided. I'm not going to choose immediately, Marcus said. Because Elara's right. This isn't a decision I should make alone. For the first time in Silvermoon history, the pack will vote on their Luna. Gasps echoed through the crowd. In 3 days, every wolf over age 18 will cast a vote. Not for who I want, but for who you believe can lead us forward. Cassandra, Raven, and Elara will each have equal standing. The candidate with majority support becomes Luna. He looked at each candidate. Use these 3 days to make your case. Talk to pack members. Answer their questions. Let them see who you really are. Then he did something unprecedented. He stepped down from the Alpha's platform and stood on the same level as everyone else. Because if we're going to evolve, it starts with me acknowledging that leadership isn't about standing above the pack. It's about standing with them. The symbolism was unmistakable. Alpha Marcus had just validated Elara's entire argument by demonstrating it. The pack erupted into conversation, excitement, and nervous anticipation. The future of Silvermoon would be decided not by tradition or authority, but by collective choice. And Elara had made that possible. The 3 days that changed everything. What followed was unlike anything werewolf society had seen before. The 3 candidates moved through pack territory, meeting with wolves at every level. But the dynamics were completely different from traditional Luna selection. Cassandra met with senior betas and established families, presenting detailed plans and policy proposals. She was professional, competent, and appealing to those who wanted stability with modest reform. Raven trained with military units, demonstrated combat techniques, and inspired warriors with her vision of pack strength through martial excellence. She represented continuity with traditional werewolf identity. Elara did something different. She held open forums. She invited questions. She sat with Omega families and listened to their experiences. She worked alongside junior patrol units and asked about their observations. She met with elderly wolves and learned forgotten pack history. And everywhere she went, she brought her journals and showed wolves the patterns she'd documented. She demonstrated how pack operations could improve by incorporating perspectives from every level. It wasn't campaigning in the traditional sense. It was education, showing wolves possibilities they hadn't considered. On the second night, something remarkable happened. A group of young betas approached Elara after one of her forums. Their spokesperson, a sharp-eyed female named Talia, asked, "If you become Luna, what happens to those of us who don't fit traditional power structures? The wolves who are smart but not strong, strategic but not dominant, capable but not alpha material." Elara met her gaze. "You become essential, because the structures I'm proposing need exactly those capabilities. Strategic thinking, information synthesis, cross-rank communication. These become valued skills, not just traits that get overlooked because they don't fit warrior culture. And if we fail, if we're given responsibility and can't handle it, then you learn, adapt, and try again. That's what growth looks like. The current system's greatest failure is that it doesn't allow wolves to fail safely, to learn through experience. We're going to change that." Talia nodded slowly. "I was going to vote for Cassandra because she seemed safe. But safe isn't actually what we need, is it? Safe maintains what we have. Growth requires risk." That conversation was overheard by dozens of wolves. It spread through the pack grapevine. By morning, the narrative had shifted. This wasn't just about choosing a Luna. It was about choosing what kind of pack Silvermoon would become. Kale's declaration. On the final day before the vote, Kale made a public announcement that sent shockwaves through the territory. He stood in the central gathering space and addressed the assembled pack. "I need to declare a conflict of interest," he said clearly. "I've been working with Elara Ashwood for the past 2 months. I've been helping her extend her influence beyond Silvermoon borders, facilitating diplomatic connections, amplifying her strategic thinking." The crowd murmured in surprise. This was a bombshell. An alpha by bloodline admitting to partnership with an Omega candidate. I'm revealing this because Elara insisted on transparency. She believes that secrets undermine trust, even when those secrets serve good purposes. So I'm telling you, I believe she's the most capable strategist I've encountered in any territory. I believe her vision for pack evolution is not just desirable, but necessary. And I believe her enough that I'm willing to stake my own reputation on her success. He paused, his next words clearly difficult. If she becomes Luna and mates with my brother, I will support that union completely. Because what Silvermoon needs is more important than my personal feelings. The admission of personal feelings, the subtle revelation that Kale had romantic interest in Elara, added another layer of complexity. Alpha Marcus, standing in the crowd, looked at his brother with something like respect. You'd stand aside. Even though you care for her, I'd stand wherever Silvermoon needs me to stand. That's what being Alpha Bloodline means, serving the pack, not yourself. The brothers' eyes met, and some unspoken communication passed between them. Elara, watching from the edge of the crowd, felt tears threatening for the first time in years. Kale had just sacrificed his own interests for her success, demonstrating the exact kind of leadership she'd been advocating. It was a powerful moment that resonated with every wolf present. The vote. The voting took place on the winter solstice, exactly 3 months after the Luna trials began. Every wolf over 18 cast their vote in a sacred ceremony that lasted from dawn to dusk. The ballots were simple: Cassandra, Raven, or Elara. The pack gathered as Elder Blackthorn, and a council of neutral observers counted the votes. The tension was unbearable. Cassandra received strong support from established families and traditional betas, those who wanted reform but feared radical change. Raven received enthusiastic backing from military units and wolves who valued martial strength above other qualities. But Elara's support came from an unprecedented coalition. Progressive young wolves, frustrated mid-rank betas, grateful omegas, and surprisingly, several senior alphas who had recognized her strategic value. When Elder Blackthorn announced the results, his voice shook slightly. The vote is decisive but not overwhelming. Elara Ashwood has received 53% of all votes cast. By pack law and democratic selection, she is the chosen Luna candidate. The reaction was explosive. Cheers from her supporters. Shocked silence from traditionalists. Anger from those who saw it as hierarchies collapse. But the vote was legitimate. The process had been transparent. The pack had spoken. Alpha Marcus stepped forward and extended his hand to Elara. The pack has chosen. Will you accept the position of Luna, with all its responsibilities and challenges? Elara looked at his hand, the same hand that had cast her out months ago during that winter night when she'd been declared unworthy. Then she looked around at the pack, Kale watching with pride and pain, the Omegas who had found voice through her, the young Betas who saw possibility, even the skeptical traditionalists who at least respected the legitimate process. I accept, she said clearly, on the condition that this isn't about me becoming Luna in the traditional sense. It's about all of us becoming a different kind of pack. Marcus smiled, genuinely smiled. I wouldn't have it any other way. The surprising twist. But what happened next stunned everyone. Alpha Marcus addressed the assembled pack. Traditionally, the Luna is the Alpha's chosen mate. However, Elara's vision isn't about traditional structures. So I propose something unprecedented. Elara becomes Luna as pack leader and emotional center, but not as my mate. Confusion rippled through the crowd. Instead, Marcus continued, I propose that Kale serve as Alpha alongside me, creating a dual leadership structure. Elara guides pack unity and strategic direction as Luna. Kale and I handle territorial security and external relations as partnered alphas. We become a leadership triad instead of a mated pair. He looked at his brother. You've been running from alpha responsibility for years because you didn't want to compete with me. But we're stronger together. And Elara's vision requires exactly the kind of thinking you bring. Then he looked at Elara. This also means that when appropriate, in time, you and Kale can explore what's clearly developing between you without it being a political scandal. The pack needs your strategic partnership. Your personal relationship is yours to determine. The crowd was silent, processing this radical restructuring of pack leadership. Elder Blackthorn stood slowly. Alpha Marcus, this is unprecedented. Multiple alphas? A Luna who isn't your mate? This violates every tradition. Then we create new traditions, Marcus replied. Because Elara's right, our old structures aren't serving everyone. If we're going to evolve, we start with leadership demonstrating flexibility. He extended his hand to Kale. Brother, will you share alpha responsibility? Kale looked stunned, but recovered quickly. I will, on the condition that we establish clear operational boundaries and make decisions through consensus with Luna Elara. Agreed. The two brothers clasped hands, and then together, they turned to Elara. Luna Ashwood, they said in unison. Will you lead this pack into its future? Elara felt the weight of the moment. Years of invisibility, months of careful maneuvering, weeks of revelation, all culminating in this impossible, beautiful outcome. I will, she said. Together with both of you, with the council, with every wolf in this territory. Because that's what real leadership looks like. The pack erupted in response, some celebrating, some uncertain, all recognizing that they had just witnessed history. Silvermoon Pack had just become something entirely new. The immediate aftermath. The first week of the new leadership structure was chaos. Traditionalists struggled with the concept of dual alphas, and a Luna who wasn't mate to either. Progressives were exhilarated, but unsure how to operate in the new paradigm. Omegas were still processing that one of their own now held ultimate authority. But Elara moved quickly to establish the structures she'd promised. She created the Cross-Rank Council, a body that included representatives from every pack level, meeting weekly to share intelligence and coordinate operations. She formalized the Omega Information Network, making it an official intelligence service. She established working groups for each major pack function, requiring Alpha-Beta-Omega collaboration. And she did all of this while maintaining her visibility and accessibility. She held open forums every few days. She continued working alongside Omegas in their duties, demonstrating that Luna rank didn't mean abandoning connection to every level of pack life. Marcus and Kale adapted surprisingly well to dual alpha leadership. They divided responsibilities based on strengths. Marcus handled military and territorial security. Kale managed diplomacy and inter-pack relations. They consulted Elara on all major decisions, and her strategic insight improved both domains. The partnership worked because all three leaders genuinely believed in the model they were building. The personal resolution. 2 months after the vote, Kale found Elara in the library late one night, their old meeting place. You've been avoiding me, he said without preamble. I've been busy, Elara replied, not looking up from the diplomatic reports she was reviewing. We're alone. You don't have to maintain the professional distance here. She finally met his gaze. Don't I? You're alpha now. I'm Luna. Even in this restructured pack, certain relationships complicate things. Or certain relationships are exactly what makes this new structure work. He sat beside her. We said we'd revisit this conversation after the trials. The trials are over, Elara. We won. We're changing everything we set out to change. So why are you still hiding from this? Because I don't know how to be vulnerable, she admitted quietly. I spent my entire life being invisible, building walls, operating through strategy instead of connection. Letting you in, really letting you in, terrifies me more than any political challenge. Kale took her hand gently. I know. I've watched you maneuver through impossibly complex situations without hesitation. But emotional risk is different than strategic risk. It is, because if I fail strategically, I can adapt. If I fail at this, you won't fail. Because we're not a strategy problem to be solved. We're just two people who see each other, who chose partnership before we chose anything else, who built something extraordinary together. Elara felt tears, real tears, not the calculated emotional displays she sometimes used strategically, but genuine vulnerability. I love you, Kale said simply. I've loved you since I watched you operate in that library, seeing patterns nobody else could see, being brilliant while the world insisted you were broken. And I'm going to keep loving you whether or not you're ready to acknowledge it. She squeezed his hand, her carefully constructed walls finally crumbling. I love you too. I have for months. I just didn't know how to let myself feel it while I was trying to survive. You're not just surviving anymore. You're thriving. You're Luna. You transformed an entire pack. Maybe it's time to let yourself be happy. She laughed through tears. That might be the hardest challenge yet. Good thing you're exceptional at challenges. He kissed her then, gentle, patient, full of promise. And Elara, who had spent her life controlling outcomes through invisible influence, surrendered to something she couldn't control, love. It was terrifying and perfect. The legacy, 6 months later. The reforms Elara implemented had ripple effects far beyond Silvermoon. Other packs heard about the dual alpha structure, the cross-rank council, the formalized intelligence networks that included Omega perspectives. Some dismissed it as foolish innovation. Others sent delegations to observe and learn. The progressive alliance Elara had been building through Kale's connections coalesced into a formal network. The Evolution Pact, a coalition of packs committed to modernizing werewolf society while preserving core cultural values. Within 6 months, 5 other packs had adopted variations of Silvermoon's governance model. Within a year, the movement spread to a dozen territories. Elara became, improbably, one of the most influential figures in contemporary werewolf politics. Not through dominance or traditional alpha power, but through the same methods she'd always used. Strategic insight, information sharing, and the ability to see what others missed. But she also remained grounded in Silvermoon, walking territory boundaries with junior patrols, sitting with Omega families, maintaining the connections that had always defined her approach to power. The pack that had cast her out as worthless had been saved by her influence. The woman they declared broken had rebuilt them from the inside out. The Omega they never saw had been seeing everything all along. The full circle. Winter solstice, 1 year later. Exactly 1 year after she'd stood at the border, barefoot and cast out, Elara returned to that same spot. But everything had changed. She wore Luna regalia now. Not the traditional elaborate costume, but a simpler version she'd designed herself. Comfortable, practical, symbolic of the new leadership model. Kale stood beside her, his hand in hers. Marcus stood on her other side, their partnership easy and natural now. The entire pack gathered behind them for the winter solstice ceremony. A year ago, Elara addressed them, I stood here and I was nothing, a wolfless Omega being cast out. If someone had told me then what the next year would bring, I wouldn't have believed them. She looked out over the assembled wolves. But here's what I've learned. Being cast out, being overlooked, being invisible. It wasn't a curse. It was training. It taught me to see what others miss. To value intelligence over hierarchy. To understand that real power comes not from domination, but from connection. She gestured to the pack. Every person here, at every rank, has shaped what we've become. The alphas who had the courage to question tradition. The betas who embraced new responsibilities. The omegas who found their voices and used them. We didn't just change leadership, we changed ourselves. She paused, emotional despite her usual control. They cast me out, unaware that my unseen influence would save them. But the truth is simpler than that. They cast me out, and in finding my way back, we all discovered that salvation doesn't come from one person's power. It comes from all of us choosing to see each other, value each other, and build something better together. The pack howled in response, not in dominance or aggression, but in unity. And Elara, who had spent her life being invisible, finally allowed herself to be fully seen. Epilogue, the lesson. 5 years after Elara became Luna, a young wolf named Cashin came to her with a familiar problem. He was Omega. He was wolfless. He felt invisible and worthless. Elara sat with him in the same garden where she'd once tended herbs while contemplating her own uncertain future. I feel like I don't matter, Cashin said quietly. Like I'm just there. Nobody sees me. Elara smiled. Being invisible isn't a weakness. It's a superpower. But you have to decide what to do with it. What do you mean? When people don't see you, you can see them. Really see them, their patterns, their motivations, their vulnerabilities and strengths. You can learn things that visible people never notice because they're too busy being noticed. She pulled out one of her old journals. I kept these for years, documenting everything I saw. Every pattern, every relationship, every opportunity. Not to manipulate, but to understand. And that understanding became the foundation for everything I've accomplished. She handed him a blank journal. Start observing. Start documenting. Learn your pack at every level. And one day, when you've accumulated enough understanding, you'll discover that being invisible gave you a form of power that the most dominant alpha never possessed. Cashin took the journal uncertainly. And if I'm never seen? If I remain Omega my entire life? Then you'll still have the satisfaction of knowing you understood your world more deeply than most. You'll still have contributed more than you received credit for. You'll still have lived with purpose and intelligence. That's worth something, regardless of rank. She met his eyes. But here's my prediction. If you observe carefully, if you contribute thoughtfully, if you turn invisibility into insight, one day, people will see you. And when they do, they'll wonder how they ever missed someone so remarkable. Cashin left with the journal, and Elara watched him go. Then Kale appeared, slipping an arm around her waist. Starting a revolution with the next generation? Not a revolution, Elara corrected with a smile. An evolution. Because that's what real change looks like. Quiet, patient, and inevitable. She leaned into him, allowing herself the comfort of his presence. How does it feel? Kale asked. Looking back on everything you've accomplished? Elara considered the question. Surreal. Gratifying. Sometimes still terrifying. But mostly it feels like I finally understand the point of all those years of suffering. Which is that being broken by one system prepares you to build a better one. That invisibility teaches vision. That the lowest position gives you the clearest view of what needs to change. She looked out over Silvermoon territory, her pack, her home, her life's work made manifest. They cast me out thinking they were removing weakness. What they actually did was give me the perspective I needed to save them all. Not through power or dominance, but through the kind of influence that only comes from truly seeing, truly understanding, truly caring about every level of pack life. She turned to face Kale fully. And that's the legacy I want to leave. Not that a wolfless Omega became Luna, but that we created a pack where being wolfless, being Omega, being different, none of it prevents you from maturing. Where every form of intelligence is valued. Where invisibility can become influence and outsiders can reshape the world. You didn't just create that legacy, Kale said softly. You are that legacy. And as the sun set over Silvermoon territory, Elara Ashwood, former outcast, former Omega, Luna and architect of evolution, allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she had turned her greatest weakness into her most powerful gift. The woman nobody saw had reshaped everything. And in doing so, she had proven that true power lies not in being the strongest or the loudest or the most visible. It lies in being the one who sees what others miss. The one who thinks when others react. The one who builds while others destroy. The one who persists when others quit. The outcast who saves everyone by first saving herself. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes power is the quiet voice at the end of the day saying, I will try again tomorrow. And sometimes power is the invisible hand that reshapes the world while nobody's watching. Elara Ashwood's story reminds us that greatness often comes from unexpected places. That the people we dismiss might be the ones we need most. That invisibility can be a training ground for extraordinary influence. In a world obsessed with dominance and visibility, perhaps the real revolutionaries are those who change everything while remaining humble enough to let others take credit. Perhaps the true leaders are those who understand that their power comes not from standing above others, but from seeing everyone clearly and helping them stand together. They cast her out, unaware her unseen influence would save them all. But she wasn't just an influence. She was a revolution disguised as evolution, a genius disguised as a servant, a Luna disguised as an Omega, and proof that the most powerful person in any room might be someone nobody even notices. The end.